The subcompact arms race continues, and this time it's Glock's newest pocket rocket up on the chopping block. Today, we're talking G43X MOS. What is up, guys? My name is John with pewpewtactical.com, your definitive source for gun reviews, gear guides, and all things. This is probably at least the third smallest Glock, maybe second. Probably third smallest Glock, all of them. As I've mentioned a few times now, when it comes to choosing a carry gun, you've got a hell of a lot of options. And while I can pretty confidently say that there's no direct answer to the age-old question of what am bestest carry gun, it is pretty cool to see a bunch of different manufacturers release kind of small incremental updates to what are their flagship carry platforms. And I assume that at least some of those incremental changes are based on feedback that they're getting from their end users. The OG Glock 43 has been on the block for a hot minute now, and in fact was one of the first pistols we reviewed when this channel started up way back when. And while Glock's entry into the concealed carry game was largely met with positive reviews, some folks griped that the diminutive length of the grip caused issues with achieving good purchase on the gun, in addition to the fact that you're limited to just 6-round magazines compared to the bare minimum of 10-round mags found in SIG's P365, which was essentially the G43's main competitor for subcompact dominance during that time frame. And yes, obviously aftermarket magazines now exist for both platforms, but it's probably worth mentioning that if you go and put a stendo in a gun kind of primarily meant to be a concealable platform, it's obviously going to change the overall profile of the gun, which in turn is going to affect just how concealable it is. And who knows, maybe I'm wrong, maybe there are plenty of folks out there with G43s who are completely content carrying the 50-round G43 drum mags.
Slides in real nice, that's what she said.
That bafflingly exist for this gun. I don't know. If that's you, hit me up. What's up? What we do know is that Glock eventually saw fit to drop the G43X update, essentially designed to directly tackle all of those gripes above and more. The 43X's grip has been altered a bit, and while it actually winds up being slightly thicker than the original G43 girth-wise, something barely noticeable like 1/10 of an inch or so, it's now about a full inch longer as well, meaning that you can likely get a full 3-fingered grip on the gun even without the magazine inserted. This concept itself was essentially born out of Glock's G19X program, which was Glock's submission for the recent US Army handgun contract, and although the G19X wasn't selected, its combination of a full-size Glock 17 frame with a compact Glock 19 slide proved pretty popular, and may have in some part played into the decision to incorporate that same design methodology into Glock's concealed line of guns. And with all of the backstory out of the way, let's dive on into the G43X's features wholesale. From front to back, you've got the signature quote-unquote slim Glock 43 slide with some serrations cut up at the front that were not present on the original G43. We've actually already added a set of excess tritium night sights, which gives you a real big, obvious blaze orange dot up front with a smaller tritium glowy dot inside of it. And overall, they're a decent out-of-the-box upgrade for a carry gun in our humble opinion. The front of the 43X's frame features the standard Glock railed frame that you'd expect, although the rail itself is not the standard Picatinny adjacent attachment system seen on full-size Glock frames, and as such, even our smallest Streamlight TLR7s and TLR8s are not compatible. You're gonna need something 43 specific, such as the even smaller TLR6, just something to be aware of if you plan on throwing a lumen emitter on your carry blaster. Compared to the original Glock 43, the 43X also adds an additional 1/10 of an inch or so in the distance between the back strap of the gun and the apex of the trigger. And that's probably not going to make a huge difference for a lot of folks, but if you've got bigger hands and maybe that was a sticking point for you on the original G43, that should, in theory, allow for a more natural angle of engagement with your trigger finger. Trigger-wise, whoo boy. I'm going to preface this by saying that I am definitely spoiled by the fact that my personal Glock has an apex trigger with a 3.5-pound connector in it, and although you're never really going to be able to upgrade that inherent sponginess that kind of just comes with the Glock territory out of a gun completely, oh boy, is the G43X's trigger very spongy. Now, at least some of that is obviously due to the fact that the 43X features a 5.4 pound trigger, which Glock helpfully lists as 24 newtons worth of force on their website, knowing that their end users will likely be intimately familiar with the common and widely understood newton as a unit of measurement. But even still, this trigger to me feels significantly squishier than what you'd find on a stock full-size Glock with an equivalent Newtonian trigger exertion impulse. The take-up is short and, again, spongy, and then you hit the wall, but you've still got a few millimeters of travel before that break. The reset is decent and audible, no real complaints there, and again, to be clear, this is probably just due to the fact that the Glock-shaped object in my hand doesn't behave quite like the more familiar Glock-shaped object my dumb ape brain has come to associate with Glock-shaped objects. You know that feeling you get when you go to take a sip of water, and you're expecting water, but it's not water, it's actually 7-Up, and your brain does that momentary recoil of, ugh. It's kind of like that, but with a gun and using the taste buds of your hand. Wow, I hate this analogy, I'm sorry. While I don't feel like it's really relevant going too far into the weeds here, the 43X features the same Glock marksman barrel technology found on all Gen 5 Glocks, which through some combination of enhanced rifling and only being produced on nights when the moon is full, is alleged to enhance overall accuracy. Maybe that matters for you, maybe it doesn't. I would hazard a guess that the vast majority of folks probably aren't being limited by the accuracy of their older generation Glock barrels, so... Moving back to the grip itself, as mentioned, you've got that longer overall length that allows for a much better grip on the gun than its predecessor in my opinion. And I found that the G43X fits my schmedium hands pretty well. The more aggressive beaver tail at the rear of the grip allows you to kind of get your hand a tiny bit higher up on the frame than you might be able to otherwise. And the complete deletion of the finger grooves normally found on Glock grips works surprisingly well considering I'm pretty accustomed to them being there on my G17. The magazine release is a bit broader than what you'd find on a full-size Glock, and is allegedly capable of being flipped for left-handed shooters to boot, though we didn't get the opportunity to test this. Of particular note, however, is the fact that the mag release spring is pretty damn hefty for a gun this small. And while I imagine that's an intentional decision to cut down on the chance of the gun slipping its mag inside your pants when concealed, it also meant that I had to literally yeet my spent mags out of the frame when reloading. Admittedly, this might wind up being alleviated over some long-term use when that spring gets broken in just a little bit more, and it's not a huge deal, you're probably gonna get used to it, but it did just strike me as odd that first time I hit the mag release, and nothing happened. You really just gotta... Last but not least, this is actually the G43X MOS. The rear of the slide is pre-cut for Glock's MOS optics attachment system, to which we've directly mounted a Shield RMSC. I'll get into a bit more nuanced thought about the whole system here in a second, but overall, I do enjoy the fact that you've got a pretty formidable carry gun that can accept a smaller red dot optic without feeling like you're approaching that tipping point of kind of what feels reasonably small enough profile-wise to conceal effectively. But all of that doesn't matter too much if the gun doesn't shoot, right? Thankfully, we ran a couple hundred rounds through the G43X with no issues whatsoever, even when shooting the dreaded, chalky Winchester White Box 9mm that lesser platforms sometimes have issues getting through. While the 43X is still quite snappy, it's essentially what you would expect from really anything in the Subcompact family, I dare say it's much more controllable than the likes of something like SIG's stock P365. Although obviously something like the 365 XL might be a more apt one-to-one comparison, and we'll probably get to that at some point in the future. After a brief period of thinking that we had the shield optic zeroed and watching the rounds hit considerably off of our point of aim, we realized that the mounting screws had walked themselves out after a few mags. Derp. For the unfamiliar, you're absolutely going to want to make sure that you Loctite the screws involved in mounting a red dot to a handgun, which will go a long way in preventing it from coming loose as it repeatedly rides an inch or two away from hundreds of tiny explosions. Once we cranked those screws down and double checked our zero, the 43X began to shine as I got more and more comfortable with it. Just for reference, this was at the end of a big day of filming, coming hot off of shooting a shit ton of different Staccato 2011s, guns that I essentially had to be conscious of my grip width the entire time because they're not what I'm used to. And when I finally switched back to a Glock platform in the 43X after a few hours, lo and behold, I found myself shooting a bit more confidently with it just because Glocks are what my brain knows, even if this one's smaller than normal. Standard disclaimer here that applies every time I'm doing handgun stuff. I am by no means an expert and am probably pretty firmly in the average box skill-wise. But once I was warmed up with the G43X, running the plate rack we had out there was reasonably easy. Strings of hits on 15-yard steel were no problem at all. And I think I even scored more hits on the steel during our mag dump sessions meant entirely to show the amount of muzzle rise in slow motion than I did with any other platform we filmed that same segment with. Again, take that for what you will. It's definitely, at least in some small part, because of that Glock muscle memory, but I also think that if I can do it, so can you. It's worth mentioning that if you ride your thumbs high up on the frame like I do, there's pretty much zero chance you're going to get that slide to lock back on the last round, such is the nature of Glocks. On my full-size GAT, this is exactly why I've got the CAGWorks slide release that gets that lever up and out of the way, but I'm not sure if any comparable products exist for the G43 family. So where does all of that leave us? Concealability-wise, the 43X really feels like it hits that sweet spot for me in that it's small enough to reasonably carry inside the waistband, even given my preference toward tighter fitting pants, while not being so small as to feel uncontrollable or like I'm unable to get solid purchase over it. The fact that you can achieve that sweet spot while also having a micro red dot along for the ride makes the deal even sweeter in my opinion, even if I wasn't a huge fan of the shield's slight dimness in bright sunlight and slightly orangish dot hue as compared to, well, the red that you would expect given the name Red Dot. If you, like me, are already kind of inclined towards Glocks as a platform to begin with, have tried the original G43 and maybe found it a bit small for your liking, or are looking for a carry gun that doesn't compromise controllability in the name of becoming a modern Derringer thing, I'd absolutely recommend giving the G43X MOS a look. While I had some relatively small complaints about the gun's trigger, I'll leave the idea of swapping it out up to you, as there's an entirely justifiable school of thought regarding leaving your critical trigger component stock on guns that you intend to carry daily, and we don't really have the time to get into that here. Considering the generally sub $600 price tag if you can find them in stock, however, I think there's a lot of value in this small package, if perhaps you can hang with that spongy trigger. Alright guys, that's gonna do it for us today. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed the content, please go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell. Bell's over there. You should hit it. And buy shirts. The shirts are really nice. We've got shirts just like the one that I'm wearing. It's soft, and it's 100% guaranteed to be very popular with fans of clothing. My name is John with Pew Pew Tactical. See you next time.